Jordan Terry. Welcome.
Thank you, Monica
So,
Moore.
one of the reasons, Jordan, that I wanted to talk to you is that I know that if I came to you with a question about a body or a problem with my body or someone I'm working with, you would probably be able to answer it from multiple points of view. From the most, on one end of the spectrum, the most concrete, evidence-based, and structural, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of the presence of some kind of entity from another realm. You really seem to have one foot in the world of science and fact and logic, and the other in the subtle and energetic and intuitive. And what I've loved witnessing is about how your work constantly strives to braid these worlds together and not just choose one or the other, but understand how one and the other really are just one. And if I could define your work in any way, which is, it's a dangerous thing to try to define something because that will limit it. But if I were to try, I would just say everything is everything and everything is at play. And you've really developed your own way of sifting through the everything and using both logic and intuition and your understanding of structure and function and energetics to help people with their bodies and using manual therapies and movement therapies. So that was a mouthful, but Jordan, can you tell me
I,
who are
I
you?
want the transcript of that, by the way, because that was beautiful. So when this is done, make sure you hit that AI companion or transcript. I want that. I'm going to put that in my bio. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Can do. I'm pretty good at writing things about other people, but suck about myself. But
Uh,
can you tell me, Jordan, who are you? And
uh,
what is your actual professional title and what do you do?
I like to go with manual bodywork or osteopathic style, right? So keeping it out, I did not go through the osteopathic medicine, but a lover of working with bones and nerves and neurology. And so then the other work that I do, I say, is applied neurology. A large part of that was formulated through neurokinetic therapy and proprioceptive deep tendon reflex, which are both applied kinesiology offshoots. Um, so I like to test things. I like to sit back, as you're saying, and also like just go quiet and listen to the body. There's stories of Dr. John Upledger would have people come in, lay down on the table, and then he'd just sit and he wouldn't put hands on and he wouldn't touch them and he wouldn't say anything. He would just like watch them and observe them. And I'm imagining if I was paying a doctor of osteopathy, relatively this day, probably like $350 an hour, and they're just staring at me while I lay on the table. And I'm like, okay, doc, what are you doing? I would like to know that. But there's something in being very still and aware in your own body and nervous system that you can then tap into others. So that was part of that, having the both. My background way back, as we discussed, is architecture. So, as you said in my intro, of looking at structure and flow of buildings, shifting to that of the human body, and still to this day, absolutely obsessed with that. Realized that that was basically a potential of fast or and famine style being stuck behind a computer. Didn't want to do that. Randomly ended up in a massage uh, intro course with my Australian wife at the time. And I don't know, the rest feels like diving down a rabbit hole. Like that was a little choice point where I said yes, and it was like, oh, look where this took me in my life. From then, since then, I maintain my massage certification for legalities of touch, but I don't even like to use the M word. I find it highly connotated. I love teaching touch therapies, that ability to listen, um, and then all the advanced stuff that goes wild and crazy down the rabbit holes. And yeah, I was laughing when you were introducing that concept of both. I love stepping in. For me, it has to work at both or at both scales, right? Right. So if it works in a weather pattern in nature, then it's probably going to work for us in some form or fashion, right? We should see that at the microscopic level. It's one of the reasons I got obsessed with polarity. It breaks down to a positive, a negative, and a neutral. we see that, protons, neutrons, electrons, we see that in high pressure and low pressure and neutral center of the storm. And we see that at the level of the cosmos as well. So once we start seeing these things at levels, all different levels, to me, it's like these are simple truths, and I no longer need someone telling me with a uh, research paper or a doctorate. And it's like, no, 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 simple truths, right? Explain it simple. And one of my favorite feedbacks, we'll see if it happens today, explaining to clients or students is, that makes sense. Like, yes, that's what I want. I want those little connections. Like my last client today, having tough time figuring stuff out, bunch of abdominal surgeries. She started doing crunches and just short lifestyle of sitting a lot and then choosing to get up in the morning and adding in shortening those even more. I was like, no, 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 don't do that. And then explained everything. And she said, that makes sense. I was like, yes, feel good about that. Uh,
Mm.
let's see. Yeah, currently about to open a school locally, possibly right here in this building and studio that I'm in. It will be an Asian bodywork style paired with Lee Holden. And then I'm going to also work underneath of a doctor of osteopathy, doing rehab, getting people after surgeries and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then constantly drawing and illustrating the body. I got hired over the weekend to do 62 trigger point images, basically for a manual for a textbook, and then a few personal clients like who comes to see me. Super random. I haven't really set forth to have a practice in Santa Cruz until joining this rehab center and the osteopath.
Mm.
That's the short answer where I'm at. Surfer of waves, the actual ones, and riding the metaphorical ones as well.
Mm.
So I live in Santa Cruz, California. I can't remember when it was, but it was like, no, I have to live by a coastline.
Mm. Mm.
On the update.
Thank you. And so you have fingers in many pies and one foot in two different worlds. But with all the work that you do, what would you say is the underlying message that you hope to get across to people that you work with or students that you have?
I think that idea and concept of balance. So just as we can talk in terms of the flow motion model and Gary Ward's work of that, excuse me, center of mass or perceived center of mass, that idea of I know it hurts there. I see you. I hear you that, it hurts back there. But like, have you looked to the other side and then like push on a trigger point and they're like, oh my God, that's it. Right. So this idea of both, that it can be a structural thing,
Mm.
but it can also be whatever an energetic thing is, an emotional.
Mm.
Past lives, I don't really delve with that, but I don't leave anything out, right? Like I love the idea and concept of like I know what I know, right? And then I know what I don't know, and I just don't even know what I don't know.
Mhm.
So if I recognize that I'm trying to look at the world or a client, or even my own body, through that looking glass, I could possibly block out a lot of which I already know I don't know, and then everything else that's outside of that. So that's a way of my best attempt to remain open, kind of, I guess, stems from like the Buddhist practice of remembering. So when you're searching for something, an answer, or your lost keys, if you can kind of slow down and know that the answer's already out there instead of reaching for it, like ether, if you try to grab ether, just the air resistance between your hand and the ether will push it away from you. But if you sit back, breathe in, open up, kind of switch to a yin style, I don't know, the things that come up and the possibilities and the things that people remember and injuries that they've forgotten and we unlock and then magic happens.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I could go on, but you go back. What else you got?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I mean, with such a diverse skill set, and you said you work with clients currently as well as teach. So, what are the kinds of people that you've been able to help the most so far? with your career as a body worker?
Definitely those with very clear injuries and timelines.
Mm.
Uh, and when I say injury, that could even be a surgery. I started my practice in Santa Barbara, mostly with referrals from an OBGYN, and about 85% of them were C-section mamas. And they would come in, I've got back pain. They draw a very similar pattern where they like draw a belt across their back. And I'm like, right, tell me about your birth, or not your birth, but your child's birth or children. And, C-section. Well, that was 7 years ago. And it's like, right, have you ever had it treated? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay. And then some light scar release, integration, education, awareness. My one of my favorite questions when people come to see me is like, how long does this last? I'm like, well, got good news and bad news for you. Nothing lasts forever, which is great if you can remember that.
Mhm.
And then that's the educational component and trying
Mhm.
to keep it simple. So I regularly, some of my homework is just maybe one level of the spine and one plain cog, right? Like hip hikes or
Mhm.
sitting is the new smoking bumper sticker. I see a lot of stuck sacrums and therefore the coccyx as well, because we sit so much and then slump over and breathe from the top 10%. And really, that's one of my personal body practices is to just remember breathe down in my sacrum. I view the breathing apparatus as pelvic floor, diaphragm, your breathing diaphragm, and your mouth holes,
Yep.
cranial diaphragm. Yeah, most of the time it's something breath oriented wherever they lack. Right, if it's rib cage expansion or even right, like a lot of people lack the ability to anteriorly tilt the cranium and get those deep neck flexors on, which unlocks the suboccipitals, and that's a big thing. Little squirrel here, but the myodural bridge of the suboccipitals, which happens to parallel, there's a governing vessel point there that says connects to the brain. And again, my love of architecture was like, connects to the brain, what? And then you go there and rectus capitis posterior minor happens to attach to the dura.
Mm.
Coincidence, I tell you. Uh, the best osteopathic definition I found of that was to provide turgor on the dura to be able to tension it, right? So if a lot of people exist like this and a lot of people stress to naturally get there, and then one of the better explanations I heard from some chiropractors, neural organization technique, they talk about when we think with them, when we like say I walk around the coffee table and I stub my toe, I don't flex forward and curse at the table and my stupidity and the pain in my big toe, but I kick back. So the myodural bridge provides turgor on the dura for fight or flight, right? And so this is a
Mm.
protection mechanism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Cool connections. And for people that don't know what dura is, it's like the membrane that goes around the brain and the spinal column. And I
Big
remember first reading about that actually. Um, I think it was in the Anatomy Trains textbook was my first exposure when there was a little sentence that said, and this occipital muscle connects into the dura. And I was like, wait. So there's a muscle that actually connects to my brain. And I remember my, well, not right to the brain, but to the membrane around the brain. And I remember just thinking like, oh my God, so wait, my posture is going to be is can tug on my actual brain. And oh my God, my life makes so much sense. And I was, yeah, this was my early 20s, and I was going through this phase of just really making connections between the body and the mind and emotions and all these things. And yeah, it just exploded my brain a little bit learning that little fact. Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is a good one. It's something that like the fascialists that people are all obsessed with fascia and now you have to train fascia. It's like, no, we don't train fascia, but I get what you're saying. But um, very few to none. I'm stoked I'm gonna have to look through my anatomy trains book again to find that bit, but none of the fascial focused people are talking about the dura.
hmm,
And the
yeah.
dura can restrict brain movement. And I need the research paper and can't find it, but it's one of those things that I cherry pick from. but our brain can move like from restricted 1 millimeter, right? So fight or flight style, up to 5 millimeters of movement.
Mm.
So the guy that got the first Neuralink installed, he was on Joe Rogan, so I was like, oh, I gotta listen to this guy. Noland, wanted to remember that name, but now I can't. He was talking about it, and about half the neurons from the Neuralink have uh, disintegrated or become not functional anymore because the brain moved more than the scientists thought that stuck it in there.
Oh my
I
God.
thought that was a really fat bit. However, the dura is this thick fascial membrane wrapping your brain and your entire spinal cord, which then, if you look at dissection, it's just seamless and goes out and wraps the nerves, right? So it has these little nerve root sheaths, and then it just goes out. And we have found in the tubercles of fascia little bits of cerebral spinal fluid. So it's not just contained to your spinal cord and your brain. And it really is that amazing mind body connection, this mystical collagen hold everything together yet keeps everything separate. How's that for the Tao
Mm.
of that definition, right? It connects and wraps everything in your body, but it also creates all the channels that create separate cavities and activities and channels within the body. Oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
my favorite definition of energy to people in terms of we can take it into the body and the organs, but even if we were just, let's say, a corporation, you have all these different levels of people and they get together in little mini communities, right? So, like, you have the upper admin, the governors, and then you have like the people that are like doing the work and the heart of the organization. And then you have the feelers outright. So all these groups of people become, when they get together and perform different tasks, that becomes an energy. Same thing in your human body, like the liver, right? It, deals with irritants, right? And so if the histamines go up, right? Like I was down to about 3 bad days this year, which is amazing because it used to be 3 months of hay fever, spring allergies, only about 3 days this year. And right, like that's an irritant, and enough sniffing and sneezing and everything start getting irritable, frustrated to even anger and angry, right? And so liver channels being livery is we see that in people that get drunk and get angry. That is a collection of cells that filter our blood, does amazing stuff, puts bile down into gallbladder, and that creates an energy. It's just like the kidneys and their messenger, the adrenals. They have their own little channel, and cortisol and adrenaline. Right, if a tiger walked in the room right now, I really hope that my adrenals are going to do the right thing so that I can run, and that would be because of fear, because I don't really feel like taking on a lion today.
Yeah.
So I love hearing that definition, that fascia wraps these organs and creates channels within the body that produce energy, uh, create energy, are energy, and it's all from physical human
Mm.
architecture at a cellular level. So there you go. There's a both of getting to just looking at the cellular stuff and what's going on and existing and bringing it into energy. It's funny, you can say energy to some people and they're there with you right away, and then other people are like, oh, that's woo woo and not science. And yet, you know, for us to be talking across the Pacific right now through these devices that we have, mine's plugged in, um, or its battery to have energy.
Mm.
I,
Yeah.
Funny, especially in body work and dealing with humans in pain. And why would you not look at both? That's my thing.
Mm. Yeah, you really can't. You can't separate it. I a clients often ask me about, like, are you working on my fascia right now? And I primarily do at this point my like craniosacral therapy is my main modality. And my answer is
Oh yeah.
yes. And you can't not touch the fascia, but it really has been played up as the everything. But yes, it's true. It is everything because it touches everything, but it's not everything because there's so much more. Um, so I love your answer there. And I just like
So,
really quickly want to go back. because it's exploding my mind a little bit, the Neuralink thing. And then we'll get back to you. But okay, so this Neuralink thing. So they put an implant and they didn't realize how much the brain actually moves. So now what kind of
Right.
problems do you think that might cause?
Well, it eroded or degraded, half of the neurons for what they had and utilized. Um, Without the Neuralink, just in the average human, right? If you exist in that fight or flight and you have restricted uh, dura and therefore cerebral spinal fluid, blood flow, rinsing and washing and cleaning of your brain, then you get accumulation and stagnancy and dis-ease.
Mm,
I love the definition of the river, where the river flows, there's life, right? The water's oxygenated, it's moving. You'll see plants along the side. There can be, fish in there and other creatures. And then where it stagnates, we see death and the loss of oxygen and algae, and kind of synonymous even with cancer, in my opinion.
mm,
And so everything, one of my favorite, that you're not doing movement now, doing mostly craniosacral is wild. One of my favorites is the people trying to debunk that, like, oh, sutures don't move. And I'm like, wait, what in the human body, like, actually doesn't move? Everything's supposed to be moving in the body. Some things more than others, right? Like my, I love the alternating joint theory. It's not perfect, but it seems to exist for mobility. So my SC moves a good deal, more so than stability at the AC, and then mobility at the GH. And that's really, really mobile. And it goes down a little bit so my elbow's more stable, and then mobility back down here. Same through
mm,
the feet,
mhm,
same through the cranium, actually. If we go to
mm,
the cranium, occiput is stable, parietal sagittal suture is mobile, and then we have stable and then mobile. This is a really important area for sutures to be mobile because of breath and breathing. And so then we interestingly see really unique sutures in this area, like the lacrimal has a planar, where it fits like two planes, harmonic, not interdigitating. Um, and then your cruciform palate, and then you have the, oh, I can't remember the technical name of it, but the vomer sits in a wedge in a groove. That's a style suture. In the maxilla and the sphenoid, right in the
mm,
nasal cavity. That's the only place that it exists. I think that's a skindolesis, because synchondrosis is the cartilaginous sphenobasilar junction.
mm,
So yeah, the body loves this polarity, or yin and
mm,
yang. Um, and we even see it in movement, right? Even in gait, we have suspension and propulsion. Okay, so we have suspension when we're receiving, so we could call that a negative. Often the negative in polarity therapy is reception, and then we have propulsion, pushing off, so that's positive. And so then we switch that all through gait. This is my other favorite. We trace that up. The lemniscate creates an infinity symbol. So you have a yin and a yang. When they meet at the center, they create the infinity symbol.
So Jordan, for those who might not see this video, was pointing to areas around his eyes, denoting places where we might need a little bit more mobility in the cranial sutures.
Cranial vault is most often with a serrated interdigitating style suture, which increases the surface area and tension, and is, for me, is just for strength,
Mm,
right? And then on the sides, we have squamous, which fit inside, and that's just an architectural principle of physics. If you think of an actual arch, when we load an archway at the bottom, there's an outward force, and so it needs to be capped. And so that we see that there. And so I just started exploring the human body and its architecture as I do, and was just like, wait, why do we see around the nasal cavity and eyes these different style sutures, and what's the evolutionary biology for that? Why would those be there? Why is that a thing there?
mm,
To me, it's breath and breathing. Andrew Huberman put up a video of like an x-ray of someone breathing, showing how much movement actually occurs in the cranium through breath.
mm,
And I was like, a lot of people like, wow. And I was like, yeah, duh. Of course. There's so much movement. And people that say that sutures don't move have never sat in their own stillness and held a cranium.
Mm,
Cranium can do wild stuff. And
mm,
then it can go really still and feel like it's not actually moving. And then you can be like, think of your smother. And then all of a sudden, and it'll do something else absolutely crazy and
mm,
tweak and change. It all moves
mm.
back to that point.
Yeah. And I can really tell in the way that you're talking how much your early training in architecture has really shaped or inspired how you view bodies. And so before we get into some of those, I want to ask you so much about polarity and cranial work and all of these things that you squirreled into there. But before we do that, I'd love for you to say a bit more about that path you took from studying architecture and then how you got interested in bodies. And was there anything that you were working on in your own body at the time that made you want to make that transition from architecture to human bodies?
Consciously, no. Unconsciously, before I started massage school, I did take on concrete with my chin in a skateboarding accident and put a 1 whole inch underneath here. Thought I broke my teeth out, got up, like, oh, phew, they're still there. And that was my biggest injury. I still have a weird jaw deviation thing that's finally manifesting if I really don't take care of it and like some ear clogging issues. But what was really amazing with that was eventually through the stuff, I'll go back to architecture, I promise. Having like hip pain and treating the scar and the hip pain going away. And another time I had bilateral knee pain, people looking at my squat and testing me. In fairness, it was at another course, so I wasn't getting full treatment, but it was all from that scar. So that was not a conscious path, but I'm grateful for it, and it's a great story. Architecture, people always laugh or scoff at your backgrounds in architecture, and now you're doing this. Uh, Basically, what I got trained was to think, here's a problem set. Most problem sets for people when they come in for body work or training is I have pain or I want to be stronger here. And then in architecture schools, like give me plans and diagrams and basically a procession and proceeding and models. I still draw the models all the time, but and figure out this problem. And so was a training in just how to think like that. So when I did end up in massage school, we had a trigger point instructor, um, John Harris, author of Fixed Pain, who was an awesome, amazing human and great teacher and loved trigger point. And so that got me into the fix it style of body work. Eventually, that ended me in a orthopedic massage center until I went and did neurokinetic therapy and watched SI joint get corrected in like 5 minutes. Whereas before I'd been like, well, we didn't get it done in, 50, 55 minutes. Maybe you just need to come back next week and we'll try again. Uh, that blew my mind and changed everything. I started my own practice after that. Uh, kind of drank Kool-Aid of all different modalities and like run home and be like, everyone needs this until finally, what is that, the Dunning-Kruger thing, right? Like go out like, yeah, everyone needs this. Oh, that's not true. Next seminar, everyone needs this. No, that's not true. And so finally, pandemic happened actually, and I began kind of paying attention to dogma, things that teachers had taught, not that they did it in their way in such a way that was to do with them. It was what I took on. And that's when I really started getting into my business and adaptable polarity of, right, like everything is everything, but also everything works and nothing works. So how do I adapt and utilize all these inappropriate skills and tools? And that comes back to architecture for me, right? To build this building the construction company needed more than a hammer, to say the least, right? They needed all sorts of tools, so many tools. Actually, the best builders are the ones with the best tools. So I also find best body workers similarly have gone and looked at and pulled and gotten a lot of tools, and then they make them their own. Do find and have found that a lot of people do like that cookie cutter thing that we were talking about before we started the recording of, if this, do that. And they really want that simplistic thing, robot. Just give me the, can we have a flow chart? Huh. uh,
If only it was that simple.
yeah. Well, we are complex beings, right? So one solution for everybody is never going to work.
Mm.
Back to the pandemic, coming out of that, realizing all these things that I had taken on, that's where I just went back to the basics. And so my focus again is on breath and breathing, osteopathic model kind of for that, but also recognizing there's a lot of different components, whether that's structural and an old broken ankle or busted chin, or what else came up today? Belief that I am not worthy.
Mm.
And these things can affect us, right? We've registered fascia has a contractile property, but it's mostly emotional. So like you
Mm.
get the good news, you get your visa, right? And all, the neuro protein peptides start pumping out into your body of joy and excitement, and you're buzzing, and someone walks in and they're like, "Whoa, Monica, what's up? You are buzzing right now, right?" You're gonna have a that is an energy versus, you know, let's not call it into existence, but you get the opposite news, or you have to wait another year or something like that, right? And it's just like disappointment, and the shoulders round, and you kind of contract and you fold in and have a total different experience in the body.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is a component of how our thoughts, emotions, everything affects everything, to come back to that really cliche saying. Um, and I want to jump ahead because you mentioned it, that when I took your course in, I think it was 2022, it was the first course, the Adaptable Polarity course you taught after the pandemic. And I
Correct.
remember we did this little workshop that for me, I already knew that this was a thing, but it was so cool for you to bring it forward in a very experimental, practical way. The effect of thoughts and emotions on, I think we were palpating the craniosacral rhythm on each other. And then we did this exercise where you got us as the person on the table to think about different things. I think on one hand, it was something very, very positive and lovely, and then on the other side, something very negative. And then you asked us to just observe the changes we could feel in the movement of the cranial bones and the craniosacral rhythm. And without any, like everybody felt differences. And I think it's just something that we often don't consider when we're treating people's structures. Um, and I remember using this in practice when I was teaming up doing sessions with a practitioner in Toronto, and she is a bit of a more of a somatic therapist, practicing
Mm.
dialoguing and applied kinesiology together. And we paired up and did some experimental sessions with people where I was the whole time monitoring the craniosacral rhythm, and she would be going through her applied kinesiology, muscle testing, dialoguing with the client. And whenever we hit on something salient, like they were lying to themselves or to us, or they had a breakthrough, they realized something new that they hadn't known before, the rhythm that I was palpating would change, either stop, or
So
speed
cool.
up, or slow down, or, you know,
Mhm.
um, it was real. So I was wondering,
Yeah.
could you speak to like what's actually happening there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thoughts have power, and emotions are even more powerful. So right when we did that drill, I do three things where you kind of just observe and register the rhythm. And then it's, yeah, like a happy place, and then a light frustration, a mild frustration, and then I often suggest like a deep loss, something like that. And yes, there's a difference that occurs through all of that. And I think that's really cool that you did those sessions from my own experience and my judgments. I think craniosacral without the somatic component, it's like a nice supported nap. And I can never underestimate the power of touch, even guiding if you are getting a little outside the non-traditional holds and guiding someone into parts of their body that they feel disconnected with. That can be incredibly powerful, and you can possibly open up some structure. But I really think if they just pass out or just think that they can lie on the table and there's no dialogue of bringing up, and that's my own experience recently. I had two amazing practitioners on me, and the biggest difference was one included, and I don't know how he did it or tapped into it. He was just so good. Quick, easy questions from listening to life experience and everything going on, and then sensing and feeling at the different diaphragms or chakras or whatever, and then just making these statements that session versus the silent one was so much more powerful for me
Interesting.
as to what's going on there. I like Dr. Jerry Tennant, the author of Healing is Voltage. He has an amazing story where he lasered off, his developer of LASIK eye surgery. He lasered off some scar tissue of cornea, released a virus, and it took hold in his brain, developed encephalitis, 22 hours a day of brain fog. Western medicine told him to go home. Don't call us, we'll call you. So he decided, with his 2 hours a day of clarity, to see what it took to heal one cell, because if he could do one, then he could do many.
Mm.
And if you can guess by the title of his book, it came down to voltage, piezoelectricity, energy. And he has this saying, don't eat the turtle soup. So he has dental as a huge one, which makes sense. All of our receptivity of fuel that we need in through the nose for the oxygen, um, but water and other fuel all through the mouth. That chewing and mastication is so important. I've seen people that stop eating because of G tubes and could never go back, and they lose the temporomandibular muscles of the joint, and they develop a forward head posture because they can no longer hold themselves up because they haven't used those chewing muscles.
Mm.
And then there's the teeth and the innervation and the fifth cranial nerve that it's really, really important. So Dr. Tennant is a huge advocate of not getting or fixing root canals because they
Mm.
leave a dead tooth, which can get infected and rot. And if it gets into the maxilla, he says this is one of the biggest voltage drops in the human body. So he's big on that. That's the don't. And then the eat is emotions. He's found, and he has little measuring devices for registering the actual electrical piezoelectric. I don't know what his little device is. It's like a tens unit. One registers and can monitor, and another one actually is like a scalar energy thing. It's wild stuff. I hope it ends up looking more like what I hope we would have in medicine from Star Trek at some point. And then he looks at thyroids and thyroid toxins because thyroid governs electrical activity of the cells. Toxins because if we accumulate enough of them, that will, like metals and plastics. That he's huge on none of the hydrogenated stuff because the cells take that and they end up making plastic cell membranes, so they're not as porous, and that shuts down the interchange. What is it? The sodium potassium ion exchange is like a little spark of life at your cell wall. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100%. He knows it way better than I. Uh, and so if you start making cells out of plastic, then that ain't going to happen. And then scars, as mentioned before. So emotions being in there as a big one of uh, potential electromagnetic fields that can take hold in an organ or in a meridian in a knee. I had
Mm.
back pain, serious like post heart back pain that I even was I couldn't sleep. And I was like, man, I might be so stuck. And this was in the middle of the pandemic, and we were evacuated from a fire, and I
Mhm.
had a newborn son. But it was so bad, I went to Cairo. I was like, fine, I gotta sleep when I can sleep with this newborn. And the Cairo thunked me good, and that night same pain. And then a friend came into town and she worked on me somatically, emotionally. And then I never had that back pain again.
Mm.
It was another personal experience of just like, wow, that was
Yeah.
wild, right? It wasn't structures, it's all the energy that was, all the stress, all that stuff going on at once in the world for me in Jordan's world.
Yeah.
So yeah, those things are huge. And right, so when we have a thought, and heart math is beautiful, science and research on this stuff, it registers, let's just call it 10. Uh, and then when you have that thought move down to the level of a feeling, that's like 1,000 times stronger, right? The electromagnetic field of your heart, the muscle inside the pericardium. In fact, if we didn't have the pericardium, the fascial bag, the collagen, the electric piezoelectric conductor around the heart, it wouldn't have the same electromagnetic field. I thought that was an interesting little anatomy,
Mm.
architectural structure. Like your own heart has a protector. It's another name for it in Chinese medicine, the heart protector, but it's also for electrical conduction throughout your body, right? So the heart is the emperor, the empress. So if I view, one of my favorite things is like two people in the airport come together because they haven't seen each other and they have this huge embrace and hug. And like, I see that and I'm like, oh, isn't that sweet? And another person sees it and, is feeling sad and missing their partner. And then another person sees it and they're like angry because of what that triggers, right? And so there's those thoughts. Thoughts have those neural connectivities back through our past and our pathways that we have developed, hits the protein peptides of whatever, love or joy or sadness or anger, and they go out into your body and they physically, at an alchemical, uh, molecular level, change our cells. And so then there is that thing, like, you walk out of a room in a neutral mood and you come back in a bad mood, and people are like, what's wrong, Jordan? And I'm like, nothing. And they're like, yeah, right. We all can feel it.
Mm. Yeah.
So why that somatic seems to be so big is it all blocks voltage. It shuts down the flow of energy
Mm.
in the body until it is made aware. Awareness can be enough, or there's all sorts of wacky and woo-woo techniques that can be done that sometimes seem to do miracles. There's EMDR. I really find talk therapy. I think that's what you're supposed to have good friends and family for, is your talk therapy, and them to call you on your BS. And then I think real therapy, from what I found, is you have to access the subconscious mind. And the most connected thing to the subconscious mind is your body, not your brain, in my opinion.
Mm.
In my opinion, trying to consciously connect with your subconscious mind, like, I'm gonna talk this out and fix it, is like you're on top of an iceberg with a headlamp looking below the water, going, I fucking got this. And it's like, no, unless you, I'm going on years experience. Think so now, working with human bodies and most of it around pain. And if you're not somehow connecting with the subconscious through the body, through breath work, deep meditation, hypnosis, shamanic practices, somatic practices. I took a course that I call neurosomatic, wasn't even a name. It was like his flagship, just getting a flagship beta course, getting it going. And so much of it was just going through awareness of actually learning to listen to one's body beyond, I gotta poop, or I gotta pee, or I'm hungry, or ouch. Right? Like there's so many things that the body does communicate. And often people later recognize that. They're
Mm.
like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I felt that in my gut.
Mm.
Right? The body speaks. And sometimes we listen. Some people are really good at listening.
Mm.
Spidey senses.
Mm. You said so much there, and it made me want to share with you. I don't want to take all the time with my story because it's not about me, but you just spoke to so much about I had for actually just after I met you in Santa Cruz for your course, or just before that, I was having, if you remember, I was having some real challenges with my foot. It was some the best that I can understand it now, it was nerve irritation. So I couldn't even make contact with my foot on the ground, just sitting, just the contact of my skin on a surface was incredibly painful. So I was off my feet for quite a while, couldn't walk, couldn't stand up. Um, and I was determined that I could figure it out structurally, like determined that I could assess all my biomechanical problems and figure it out. And you know what? In my journey, I discovered so many things about my structure that were potentially vulnerable. But then at the end of the day, what reduced my pain the most was when I took a trip to Australia and it disappeared completely. And up until the moment I got on the plane,
Mm,
like I was actually in a wheelchair at the airport because I could barely stand up to queue in line. And then I was in Australia and standing barefoot on rocks and just being mind blown like what just happened here? Because clearly there was something more going on than just the structure of my body, but there was something that I finally was like, oh, I should probably like clearly there's some kind of, to put it really simply, some kind of stressor that I'm not dealing with here. And then to go into specifically what is stressing my system so much that I have to leave the country to be free from it. Because then I came back to Toronto and everything came back again. All the pain that I originally had came back. And it triggered this deep dive into, well, what's going on at a psychological, emotional, spiritual level? There's all these things I haven't yet investigated, but clearly they don't affect me if I leave my environment where these things are present for me. And I love what you said about the body being the closest we can get to the unconscious mind. That's what Upledger teaches in his courses as well, that it's the unconscious. The body is the unconscious. And of course, so for me, it was all unconscious. How am I supposed to know? Uh, you know, that's the definition of
mm.
unconscious. We don't know what it is. But I think what was really great was that through my devotion to understanding my physical structure, it got me curious about the potential for something's happening here beyond my structure because all the work on my structure I'm doing is doing nothing for me. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's a question in there for you, but I wonder if you have anything that you could
Reminds me
respond
of
to.
clients that wanted it to just be structural. I think it's just a pinched nerve. It's just this, it's just that. And as we do the detective work and going into it, one of my favorites is intake. And they know exactly when their pain started.
Mm,
And then I'm like, okay, what happened before that? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, well, what about just before that? And they're like, nothing, nothing. And, start talking to them instead of what happened. Like, what was, where were you? Where were you living? And you kind of go through life and you're like, oh, your mom passed away. Yeah, but that's not related to this.
mm,
I'm like, well, in this physical world, nothing comes from nothing, and something always comes from something. And again, that detective side of looking at that, and that takes curiosity that most like yourself, right? Like I'm gonna power through and fix myself. And oftentimes it's just stepping back and really allowing a feeling to be felt. A lot of people don't want to feel bad emotions because they feel bad, but then what happens when you don't feel them? Where do they go? We should be angry or we should be upset about stuff just as long as like a toddler, right? They should be teachers about emotions. Like if you're angry, you should go be angry. And you know, that's in an appropriate public situation, then remove yourself and, have tools, stomp up and down, get bare feet, fire, but don't yourself. I definitely got angry and mildly fractured my hand from punching just a table. Just in there's better ways to release anger than that, or to actually allow yourself and recognize the fear and the guilt and the shame. Those are some of the more debilitating emotions that
mm,
I see that really, really bring down the potential voltage
mm.
uh, of a human being. That's really, I don't know if you've ever heard of power versus force.
Yeah.
book by a Dr. Hawkins. I can't remember. It's not Stephen, that's for sure. It might be a Richard Hawkins. Anyhow, he goes through this scale of empowerment, and it's based off of emotions and potential. And so way down at the bottom are like guilt and shame and sadness. It's an exponential curve, so really low in what he calls disempowering emotions, really deep low things like guilt and shame, sadness, really pull the electricity or block the electricity and neurological flow of a human being. Again, referencing healing is voltage, Dr. Jerry Tennant. If you have no voltage there, you won't heal. If you can't hit that voltage, the cells won't replicate appropriately or duplicate or heal in general. And so if you have these deep, really devastating things down below, that's why I reference them as they're some of the most debilitating emotions to hold on to not feel, to suppress, to shove it down and in and carry on with a stiff upper lip like everything's fine.
Mm.
But he also goes about how you can come out of that. He never states that it's bad to feel. And he shows how you can go through the levels. And it is a natural progression as we can watch toddlers do. It's beautiful. And so uh, anger is up a little bit higher because it's got fuel, it's got fire. Um, and he talks about how that can go back down or up and lead to courage. Courage is the first level of empowerment because it can lead towards revolution. And then I was saying my favorite part, the little bit that I love, is 250 is registered as neutrality. And that experience of neutrality, to look at something and just witness and observe it and not say that it is good or bad, is an empowering experience. That's like a great lesson for any therapist in general, but also specifically people that are listening and doing the subtle energy and work that labels to good or bad. And by labeling something as good or as bad, it's like almost like we create a little bit of separation instead of connection in general. Anyhow, it's
Mm.
really cool scale. Makes a lot of sense as to how that can energetically affect someone and create that kind of blocking electromagnetic field that ends up being like, I'm a tumor, I'm a tumor, I'm a
Mm.
tumor, I'm a tumor,
Mm.
versus vital and living and healing.
Yeah. Power versus force. If people are interested, they should definitely check out that book. It's really fascinating. And you know what? That reminds me of another story about me, but I think it really brings home the concept you just described about how shame, which is uncomfortable to talk about, it's probably one of the hardest things to talk about. Um, but there's this understanding that when we have injuries or pain that is intertwined with those, like you described, lower energetic level emotions like shame and guilt, there's a theory that those are slower to heal or harder to overcome, or the process is a bit more difficult to get out of pain when those emotions are tied into it. And I um I just want to share a story about that for me, which I'm comfortable talking about now. But at the time, when I had a lot of dance injuries, they were primarily related to overextension of my spine, trying to make all the pretty dance shapes and things. And so I had multiple extension-based spine injuries, and throughout that entire 10-year dance career, it was just laden with um, poor self-image. A lot of it was the culture of being in the dance world was so negative. It was very old school, teachers telling us to skip meals and that we had to look a certain way, and being shamed in the classroom for different behaviors or for the way that we looked, or like even if you had hair that was a bit out of place, like our hair wasn't done perfectly, we'd get
Just
shamed.
ballet.
This was ballet, yeah. So there was so much of that period where I was getting injured, so much of it was just blanketed with this layer of feeling bad about myself and who I was and not feeling ever good enough and just feeling a lot of shame about my body. And it's been really interesting to, like you said, hindsight, you can see this a little bit more easily. how the emotional side of it impacts you. Because at the time, I was, just pushing that down, not really realizing that I was feeling that way. And then when I started working with bodies, I was noticing how some people, when I was giving them movements to do to help with their back pain, they could move through it so quickly and seem to be able to heal themselves with the movements. And, they do one little round of an exercise and feel great and never have pain again. And then some people, it just took years and years and things moved so slowly. And I've never been a quick fix person. Nothing's ever worked for me the first time. It's been years and years and years of slowly making progress. And then I look back on that and I see how it was so much of that must have been influenced by, during my period of injuries, how much emotional turmoil and feelings of self-hatred and shame and just a lot of those low energetic on that scale you were describing from power versus force. So much of that was layered on top of all my structural injuries. And I think that is something that I like to try to tease out when I'm working with people and help them understand, this might be a thing that you're experiencing. It might not be a quick fix because of, life. Life has been this for you. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that. I don't
Right.
know if you have thoughts and things about that.
What? Oh, it reminds me of my first frozen shoulder client, and after first session was like 85% better. I was like, yeah. And then she comes back the next week for her follow-up and it's right back to it. And I'm like, all right, well, tell me more about this trip that you were on. And she's like, what, the trip I didn't want to be on? And a lot of frozen shoulders, yeah, have a subscap component, and even Trevelyan's like kind of um formulators of trigger point therapy. They had nicknames for all the muscle, and subscapularis is the frozen shoulder muscle. It's also, thanks to George Goodhart, relates to the heart channel, and it's actually the heart channel is one of the most beautiful, easy channels to follow and find. And the referral of subscapularis can even look like the referral of a heart attack pain, like chest and down the arm, like kind of similar. And so when she said that, I just kind of laughed and was like, oh, so we're not doing all structural here. We need to do a little bit of the emotional release and the self forgiveness and husband forgiveness. And then the shoulder was good to go.
Mm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I was trying to look up, there's a beautiful representation of this. It's a Sam Neill movie. I can't remember the name of it, but he injures himself. And it was one of the best cinematographic film injuries I've ever seen, because he gets triggered and they drop down and they show his fists clench and everything, and he goes to charge and instead he misses a root and he like breaks his ankle. And the way that they just did it with the timing, and that there's an emotional component, right, like had he not been emotional, he probably would have not gotten hurt. And
Yeah.
that's another interesting thing, is that most of the time there's an emotional component to a big injury.
Mm.
Caroline Miss, what does she call herself? Intuitive healer, author of many books, and hilarious woman in my opinion. Um, she, in her all of her experience, many years of doing what she does, she's like only seen one or two people that were truly blindsided. Everyone else, there was another bigger component of life and a emotion or something that was pulling, stressing the system. Back to, let's go into the neurophysiological components. What happens when you're stressed? Do you think as well? No. Do you make better decisions? No. And then we get hurt. And
Mm.
that ends up being a tied in component to the injuries. In fact, with one of my students, we developed a really quick, it's an old AK technique called injury recall technique, that we just incorporated into an emotional recall technique, and it really seems to just help kind of delete those old web browsers that are stuck open there. That's one way I view dysfunctional neurological programs that are around traumas. There's just like it's like a web browser that's no longer useful, but it's like pulling all this RAM that the rest of your computer's not working as well. And then you clear it, and all of a sudden everything works a bit better, or one program or something instead of a web browser. My father was treating migraines with dried fruit, and I was like, this is weird. Like, and we can test the tongue and the receptors of the tongue, and he had all these dysfunctional tongue receptors. Um, Tongue receptors have the C1 innervates the tongue, so a big connection back to brainstem as well. And I was just like, "Have you had any concussions or anything?" He's like, "Well, when I was landscaping in my youth, I had that pickaxe break off and hit me in the back of the head." He was like, you know, getting some soil, hit a rock, the neck broke, it flew up and hit him in the back of the head. So I compressed the back of his head, right? So ischemia, local ischemia will tone down blood flow and the brain will change. Like this is a form of therapy localizing, and retested his tongue and his tongue test normal. And so I treated with some PDTR stuff. And when I hit the DTR, I must have eliminated such a deep old program that he just started emitting heat. And when I ended up calling Dr. Palomar, because I was like, what the hell? He walked down the hall and back and came back and was like, can you guys see this? And he had a golf ball sized lymph node swelling just like that, just in those couple minutes. We were like, whoa, immediate Googles were like bacterial or cancer. So it's like, uh-oh. So again, I called Dr. Palomar and he was like, oh, you got rid of that old neurology that allowed the lymphatic system to finally start working, and it hadn't been working for, can't even do the math, 55 years.
So we've been talking a lot about how emotions, energies, these can all have an effect on our structure. And, you can bang on trying to address something from a musculoskeletal, a fascial perspective, and things might not change. But at the same time, a lot of things are genuinely structural. And in the course that you taught, Adaptable Polarity, I also remember you did a really interesting workshop on the concept of paired structures. And I'll do
Mm.
my best to explain it, and then you can do a better job of explaining it.
I
So,
look forward to hearing this.
and this is something that we both learned as well in the context of closed chain biomechanics through anatomy and motion. We speak a little bit about paired bones. And what this means is it's just another way of connecting dots in the body. And so some structures in the body, I guess the best word I can think of, mimic each other or mirror each other, have a similar shape and a similar function in different parts of the body. And so when one of these structures becomes affected, it'll affect its paired bone. And maybe a good example that I came across recently in clinic was I was working with a woman who had back pain. And she also, in her history, had a coccyx fracture and a ankle sprain. And when we looked at how her body was moving, or how her structure was aligned statically, she had a coccyx that was laterally flexed off to one side, and then a calcaneus, her heel bone, was laterally tilted to the other side. And in our training in anatomy and motion, we've linked some things together, like the coccyx and the calcaneus have a linkage in motion where they should always be going in the same direction throughout the entire gait cycle. So if the coccyx tilts to the right at the same time, at any point in gait, the calcaneus should also be tilting to the right. And that's a nice way of making quick connections between things and making decisions about what do we want to work on. So to go back to the her history that she had both a coccyx injury and a calcaneus or ankle sprain injury that was probably impacting on the resting position of her foot. That was a really cool process of treating both of those areas and then bringing them back together to synchronize in movement by doing some pelvic motions and some foot mobility exercises, some pronations and supinations. And so that was really lovely just to be able to make those connections and have that awareness of paired bones in the body. And I know that you think about this on probably such a broader scale than I'm even aware of. And so maybe could you say a little bit about some discoveries you've had with linking structures in the body and working with those?
Sure. So there's two things in there that you brought up. One is pairing. I find pairing to be a very local thing around a joint most of the time, and I'll come back to explain that. Uh, and then with the bone pairing that you're talking about, I call that more of like reactors. It's reflexes.
Mm.
So if you think about that fascial web network that we have, if you view it as like a spider's web, and all of this is beautiful web, and then you have the cob kind of down here that throws off the whole network, right? Like spider webs are beautiful and amazing, and then cobwebs, those are the things you need to clean up. I was taught you never kill the spider because the spider brings wealth. Aranya porta guadagna. Horrible Italian, but spider brings wealth. And so I leave up if I have a spider visit my abode and they get inside and they put up a beautiful spider web. Uh, you know, it's not uncommon where I live to have some fruit flies get in. I live with my front yard as huckleberries right now, and they're going off. They're amazing. So we get little flies inside. So it's like, oh, that's beautiful. But if it turns to a cob, then that's where we need to go treat, and that's where scar tissue comes in. That's where old breaks and that loss of integration and then that reactivity. And these are things that we can beautifully retrain. I don't remember the coccyx one. I think of it more in terms of the sacral tilt to the calcaneus. I also find that the calcaneus is more like a bladed bone. It has a relationship to the ilium as well as the scapula and the temporal bones. All those bladed bones have a very similar rocking that occurs. Uh, and then there's what are called Lovett reactors, which Dr. Lovett named after himself. Uh, that's a spinal coupling process that occurs, but they take it up to the occiput and the sacrum as being reactors, the coccyx and the sphenoid. Uh, and then they kind of stop there. Oh, temporal to the ilium. But I was not happy that they didn't do the rest of that. And so the whole cranium, and you can test it all out, and I've had other people test it out, has reactors, right? Like this orbital hole relates to the obturator foramen, these holes relate to the other holes down there. The sagittal suture relates to the linea alba, all of it. All the little bones in your mouth can find reactors down below. And that makes sense, right? Like as you just shifted in your seat and you move your seat around, right? Like reflexively, I don't have to think about where I have to put my head. I'm just going to reflexively, like, adjust my seat. And then there's where I am. So that's what I call more reactors or reflexes. And they are paired all throughout the body. There's numerous ones, and even there's a relationship here at the chin to knees, right? So if this is your hip joint, trochanter, this was two bones that did actually fuse, and there's a relationship here to knees, but there's also a relationship to the kind of the SC upper sternum to knees. I think a lot of it's embryological. We fold it out. So there's a relationship to knees there, but then I was saying, then there's also the SC joint to the sesamoid bones of the feet. The I got demonstrated and still call it the Altoid trick from First Anatomy of Motion that I went to.
Just to describe it so people know what we're talking about, you put the Altoid under someone's sesamoid and then you test their shoulder range of motion. And the sesamoid is just like a little bone underneath
Swing.
the toe joint, but having that little bit of input there for some people, if they've had some kind of injury, perhaps with their clavicle, and you just put that little bit
Or
under
vice versa.
their foot, then you can see ranges of motion increase in their
Yeah.
shoulders just by making contact with their sesamoid because of some kind of what you're describing, some kind of connection there. And what is the connection? You mentioned embryological and you mentioned reflexes, and how do you make sense of that?
I think a huge component is embryological, that folding out and that patterning and the divide and the split of the diaphragm. Uh, in my investigation into Chinese medicine, there's a lot of stuff that's breath and breathing, duh, that's important. And then there's a lot of stuff that's gait oriented, and the rest of it's nociceptive withdrawal. I can't say the rest fully, but a lot of it, right? That idea of if I'm out in the wilderness and I'm foraging and I see a blackberry and I'm like, oh, I've had that blackberry experience. I want to eat it. and I reach for it, but I hit a thorn, I recoil away, right? That's a well documented nociceptive withdrawal reflex. That that recoil that can be traced through a lot of different things and patterns.
This might seem like a weird tangent, but it's something that I saw you had posted on social media. I think it was on your Facebook page. You write some interesting little things sometimes that make you think. And one of them was the acronym VOMIT, Victim of Medical Imaging Technology, which I thought was quite
Yeah.
clever. And it made me think about actually a story of a client of mine I just saw on the weekend, and then I'll get your thoughts on this. But to bring the acronym VOMIT to life, I have this client who has some back pain and it's not getting better, and it was turning into some pain down his leg, and it was after an accident where he fell, and he went to get an MRI to get some imaging of it. And the MRI comes back. He sends it to me. He hasn't read it yet, but he sends it to me. And it just has all of this very intense language in it. Severe degeneration of blah, 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 and a cyst that's 7 millimeters in size, and herniation of this, and degeneration of that. And it was just very doomy sounding. And as we both know, you can have that kind of imaging, and that person might have zero pain or they might have excruciating pain. And I asked my client, well, like, do you want me to tell you about your report? Because I've read it and we can talk about it if you like. And he says, do I need to? And I said, you don't need to, because I told him exactly what I said to you. Sometimes you might have pain with that report, sometimes you might not. So you don't necessarily need to know the details because the way that we end up working with you probably would be the same regardless. But it does help us to be a bit more specific about knowing which parts of your back maybe we want to address with our movements and our treatments. And if you want to have more informed conversations with your medical team, then maybe understanding the language would be good for you. But beyond that, like I don't feel if you don't want to know, we don't need to discuss it. And I think ultimately for him, that was a good decision because as we know, the more you hear of the being a victim of medical imaging technology, you can easily become one and catastrophize your test results, and it becomes a situation that was worse than it was in the beginning. And I wonder, can you say some stuff about that? Why did you write that that acronym? I love
Oh,
it.
I can't remember when I did it. First off, it's not mine. I've heard of it before.
Hmm.
It must have been around some client that got some imaging and was like, "Oh, well, I just have arthritis in my hip, you know," and it was like doomed that they can't heal, and that's what they just have to live with.
Mhm.
And this just gets into the power of the mind and that placebo nocebo effect. Placebo being, you know, you get the sugar pill and but you're told it's magic medicine and you feel better. And then the placebo side is vomit is one side of that, or the story, which has not been singular. I've heard this too before, but someone goes in, they're feeling all right, not too bad, and the doctor's like, "You got 3 months to live," and then they're gone in 2 months because they believed the doctor. They took that on. So to me, it's just yeah, the power line that what we think and then end up believing. It's probably one of the most powerful things for human health.
Yeah.
You can move well. Dr. Joe Dispenza goes on this awesome neuro geeky anatomy explanation of if you consume even the highest quality food in a sympathetic state, you miss most of the nutrients. Several vegans that I know a couple of healthy vegans. I'm not totally bashing veganism, but there's so much fear and fright around food and sourcing that by the time it gets to their intestines, it's not being absorbed, in my opinion, from what I see.
Mm. Yeah. And I want to bring it back to you a little bit before we've talked about so much, and we'll finish soon, but I really want to hear a bit more about how all of this knowledge that you clearly have, how has it been able to help you on your journey? And of course, at the beginning of your journey, you didn't know everything that you know now. But I'm really curious to hear about, did you have a time when you were really struggling with your body, and what were your biggest challenges that you had to work through, and what did you do? What did it look like at that period of time when you were really learning how to help yourself? And I'm making assumptions here from what I know about you, but could you tell a bit more about your movement and physical journey?
Sure. I've been blessed with having serious chronic pain or debilitating issues. As I shared, I bonk my jaw pretty good. I have to monitor that and keep it in check with, movement practices or getting some manual therapy on my cranium jaw. Uh, what has really helped, one, it's like counselor, know thyself. So by knowing anatomy and knowing how and what moves, if I do get into pain. So one of my favorite last year pains was I had this weird cuboid pain and I was trying to wedge it and move it differently. And it just wasn't going away. And it was because of I had been sitting for whatever reason at my desk to the side, and my right leg crossed over my left, and my fibular head had locked up, and that locked up the lower one. And then for whatever reason, my pain was the bottom of the cuboid, the bottom of the foot. And once I realized that and just switched and became aware of how I was sitting, no more foot pain. So it allows me to be a detective for my own body as well. And then if I can't figure something out, I go ask for help. I think that was the third time I did anatomy in motion. It was the second or third, it wasn't the first. And I couldn't access a phase of gait. And I was just really struggling. And then I remembered I had four stitches in my um, right ankle, and we just did a little scar tissue work, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, there we go. Now I'm back. So again, it allows me to be a detective, to be happy and aware of my own body, and to pay attention and go a little bit deeper, I suppose, at times. I also have, colleagues, therapists at the ready for either somatic work or I enjoy doing some hypnotherapy from time to time too.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that you have not just a practice of getting treatments and doing movements to help yourself, but also how much of keeping your body well is from the energetic and emotional and that side of things and how that all blends together. It's important to hear that. And as silly as it is to say, also coming from a man's point of view, it's just, I guess in our conventional gender stereotypes, it's not as common for a man to be upfront about, yes, I pay attention to my emotions. So thanks for being that model of what a man can and should do to take
I
care of
have my
themselves emotionally.
an adventure into the body, and your own body will end up being an adventure into yourself if you're honest, into your psyche and self and parts of self.
100%. Yeah. I was just curious if there's anything along your journey that really inspired you to work differently, or if is there a teacher or a book or anything you encountered that really switched the trajectory of what you were doing with your body? Um, in any way that comes up
Uh,
for you at any point in your life, what is the biggest
with my
kind of
with my body work, when I think about myself, I don't really have a an official movement practice. Like I don't wake up and um do a routine. Although my son and I, if we don't go surf, he likes doing sun salutations with me now, so we do practice that. But when he's not around, I don't do a single sun salutation. I'll go play. I'll go surf. I really find play to be important and, fun. And one of my other favorite activities in play is ping pong.
Yes.
the jumping around. Uh, I I don't know. I feel like it's so good for the brain and the body, and we have a thread because there's a group of guys that get together regularly, and someone actually threw up there a research paper about paddle sports. I don't think it actually referenced ping pong, but I think it was like tennis and pickleball. Why pickleball has become such a cool new fad across the US
Mhm.
here. I don't know how it's doing down under. But that aspect of play for me has to be playful, and when it's playful, so much more happens, right? If you go and you watch some people at the gym, they just look like they're terrorizing themselves. And so if you're terrorizing yourself, even though you're doing something functionally that should be healthy for you, what does that do, right? Like, what's the mind body connection there? If you're like, I hate doing this, but I hate being fat more, and it's like, mm, right? If we go on that scale of empowerment, instead of like loving it and loving themselves, they're hating and shaming themselves into something different.
Mm,
That seems like a setup for tripping and falling on one's
mm,
face. I would say, and it's hard to compare that I say versus a Zen master, but definitely every single one of my clients, I consciously breathe and move my spine with breath.
mm,
100, 200, 300 times a day. I really try to. Every time I get into the car, I position, I go through it, I check my mirrors, I set my mirrors up so that I'm in good posture. So that if I look in my rearview mirror and I can't see, I know that I've slouched. And so I get a reminder and I'll probably take a deep breath. Um,
mm,
yeah, I would say that conscious breath, the gift of, and I can do
mm.
that by being in my bones and being in my breath and feeling that all move and what's stuck. And uh, I definitely cog it up. I love going through the three planes of motion, like, oh, I'm sticky there. And then I change the pelvis and I'm like, oh, it's better if the pelvis is there. Investigate the pelvis. I do some breath and breathing and then go check back. And typically what was stuck just a moment before feels, oh,
So it sounds like you have more of a practice these days for yourself of weaving and blending movement into your life in smaller moment to moment ways versus having a longer duration workout or movement practice. Yeah, everyone does it so differently, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just kind of knowing what works for you and having such a large toolkit for you to work with personally. You have so much range to choose from about what you want to do and how you want to do it with your own body and with other people's bodies. And um, building on that, I have two more questions for you. Second to last one here is I was wondering if thinking about yourself in a time in your life where you needed the most assistance with your body and you were maybe after that jaw accident you mentioned, or when you were struggling a little bit, what would be, do you think, a piece of advice that you would now give to yourself then?
I would have done more immediate rehab. I was traveling, I was homeless, I was with my wife in our truck and our camper in tow, traveling from the East Coast across to the West Coast. Uh, I mentioned it earlier. There's this thing called injury recall technique, which is basically utilizing therapy localization and flexion of the brainstem to release the brainstem with touch to basically show the brain body that it's safe and you're in this current moment. I have found that I can utilize that if I find myself spiraling in my thoughts, if I can tuck my chin and make suboccipitals long, therefore releasing the um, dura because of that myodural bridge we were talking about, I can like karate chop negative spiral thought pathways like really, really quick, beautiful little tip and trick that I now utilize. And I even teach people. It's really, I don't understand. I didn't get it in any of my other AK offshoots. I got it dropped into my Facebook Messenger. Like, check this out. And it's old applied kinesiology chiropractic technique. And I really find it to be beautiful. And that's just the thought of the brain body connection, safety, and the brainstem. And so, touching that spot and just kind of being present in the moment and what you feel. I did grow up with a dad, though, that during those times of falling down and skinning my knees on the playground and crying and stuff like that, that he taught me to cover it, to breathe, to, connect with it, to, he
Mm.
called it healing it. Uh, and It's funny. I thought it was really weird and quirky in my youth, and now I'm like, damn cool.
Now look what you're doing with your life. So injury recall technique, that's something I'll have to look into. It sounds really valuable.
Telling everyone about it. It's wild. It really just any of the brain down neurological patterns holding a um structure, tissue, whatever, it just loosens that up and then allows so much different holding and change because you're not fighting a brain down that's not safe, basically, approach.
Yeah,
It's cool.
safety. Safety in our systems is huge for making any kind of change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, my last question for you, Jordan, because we've been talking for, oh my gosh, I have like a whole list of questions I didn't even get to with you, so we might have to talk again sometime. But I want to wrap it up with this last question, and I like to ask this to people, not in the context necessarily of doing interviews with them, but I've asked this to a lot of people over the course of my life, and just for fun, I think it's fun to watch people think about this and hear what they say. So, my question for you is if you were to die tomorrow and no one would remember that you existed, so you're just completely wiped off the record of the planet Earth, what is one thing that you would like to look down from heaven, look down and see is different about the world as a result of you having been in it, even though no one remembers that you were even there?
Oh, geez. The first thought that actually popped in was look to the other side as a self-reflection of pain and discomfort and physical or emotional.
Mm.
Uh, and I just, I don't know. That's a great question. I think the little bits of feedbacks and appreciations and ahas, and that makes sense that I get from clients and colleagues, etc. You know, them making their own awareness connections. That's one of my favorite things. That little aha, that little like, oh yeah, that is right. Speaking of Australia, this guy just came to mind. One of my favorite clients. Only saw him 2 times post ACL surgery. Like 6 out of 10 pain, and PT wasn't doing anything. Did some scar tissue and neurological work, but we did a lot of aim and shifting his weight. And after the second session, or I think we booked a third, and he canceled. And we talked about it, and he was like, "Mate, I have to tell you, one of the biggest things that you gave me that the PT didn't." He's like, "You gave me permission to put weight and use this leg again."
Mm.
He's like, that little permission of like, no, just find the safety. Yeah, here you have pain there. That's fine. We're gonna work towards that. But like, look, here you're good. So let's work with what you got and keep practicing this. He's like, I have to say that that permission was the biggest thing, and I'll always remember that.
Mm. Yeah, I love what you said there about being able to make connections that just make sense. I love that too. I think that's something that it brings me a lot of joy when I'm able to do that and when other people are able to kind of have something click for them, like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, if the whole world could just, have more moments like that, there'd be a lot more joy, I think, to share around.
Last thing, Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. One of the most prolific things that I remember in that book was the truth is simple.
Mm,
And so when it's complicated and there's a lot of things that are complicated that like once it's broken down, once someone's truly authentic, once you get to like the absolute heart of it, that truth, it's like it makes sense, and it makes sense to all different ages and levels. I love those.
mm. The truth is simple. Well, Jordan, that's a good note to finish on. So thank you for your time. And if people
My
want
pleasure.
to find you anywhere on the interwebs, where's the best spot for them to look?
Adaptable Polarity on Instagram or Facebook or adaptablepolarity.com.
We will make a little note about that on the page for this interview as well, so people can find you and get in touch if they like what they heard you say today.